Be'ezras Hashem Yisbarach, we're here on Meseches Chullin, Daf Kuf Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. We are right in the middle of a Gemara where Rava was saying Shitas Reb Eloi normally holds Ein Shutfis. Rava holds, in many cases he agrees that there is Shutfis. So we're going to start 4 lines down from the top by Matanois, Matnas Kahuna. Sagt die Gemara, Matanois Afgab de Kasrak, Mana Vinasan, even though the Pasuk says Vinasan, which is a Lashon Yachid, and there is no Shutvis, Ekalamemar Yalaf Nesina Nesina, Mirishas Hagez, maybe he makes a Xer Shava Nesina from Rishas Hagez, where there is Shutvis. Where there is not Shutvis. Malhalan de Shutvis Loi, Avkan de Shutvis Loi, therefore, Kasrak Mana Me'es, Zayvche Hazavach, plural, even Shutvim would be chayiv in Matanes Matnas Kahuna. Ella, time of the Kasrak Mana, Zaktik Mar, because it has a pasuk Me'esev Chazevach to be Marbe Shutvis. Halav Hakri, without that, Havamina Lilith Mereshus Hagez, you might think, make a Gzir Shava from Reshus Hagez that there is no Shutvis. Adarabba, I would say you have a Nasan, Nelif Me Truma. And from Truma, I would learn either way that there is Shutfis. So why do I need a riboy of Esev Chazevach? And the Gemara answers, Eina Chanami. I would be able to learn out from Truma. And the Bach adds in the word Ella. So Ella me'is Esev Chazevach lamali. So why do I need the pasuk of Esev Chazevach to be Marba Lashon plural that Matanes does have Shutfis? The answer is Rabbi Damar of Hadin Im Hatabach. Like we already said several times previously in Chullin, that Esev Chazevach tells me that the one who's shechting is the one who has to give the matanes, and the kohen can go directly to the butcher to collect his matanes. That was Rava's famous shita. So the Gemara Bikurim, Afagav the Kasav Artzicha, Didcha in Dishutvis Loi. By Bikurim it says it has to be from your land, which sounds like singular and not shutvis. Kasrach Mana Bikure Kol Asher Ba'artzicha. Any Bikurim of the land. And the side of the Gemara changed it to the Artsum, plural, many people's lands, which is Marbe Shutvis. So if Bikurim is Chayev, even B'Shutvis, Ela Artzicha Lamali, so then why would Pasuk say your land singular, which sounds like Ein Shutvis? The Gemara answers, Miyute Chutza Aretz. Artzicha is coming to say your land as opposed to Chutza Aretz, which is not considered your land, and there is no Bikurim in Chutza Aretz. So the Gemara Tzitzis, Afogabda Kasrachmana Kisuscha Yorksus Didcha. In the Shutvis Loi, Kasrachmana Akante Big Day Hem, Ludayraisam Lashon plural, even Rabim, even the Beged of Shutvim would be Chayiv in Tzitzis. Ve'ela Ksuscha Lamali, so then why does the Pasuk say Ksuscha, which sounds like it has to be a Lashon Yachid, a singular, only a single person's Tzitzis, and not the Shutvim? What is that for? And the Chedreb Yehuda, Damir Yehuda tells She'ula Petur Min Tzitzis. It's not coming to Memayit Shutvim, it's coming to Memayit if it's not yours, because you borrowed it. Kol Shloishim Yoim, for the 30 days of that someone has a borrowed garment, is not chayiv in tzitzis. Sakti Gemara Micah, a fence around your roof. Afagam Kasrach Mana Le Gagecha for your roof, right? Asisa Micah Le Gagecha. You should make a Micah for your roof, which sounds like it's in the Shutvis Lai only if it belongs to Yachid, but not of a Shutvis. Because someone can fall off from it. Anywhere that there's be a problem of falling off is chayiv in a micah. Ella gagecha lamlisa. Then why does it say your roof, which sounds like only if it belongs to Yachid? So the Gemara Lemiyute Batik in this year's about the Midrash is coming to exclude a base medrash and a basic knesses that roof is not chayiv in micah. Amar Bibi Barabaya. Abaya argues on Rava, who says that Rabbi Eloi in all these cases agrees that even Shutvis is chayiv. Rabbi Barabaya says it's not true. Less new lahani klali, he doesn't agree to these rules. Did Tanya, because he has a brisa that says beferish behemta behemas shutvis hashutvim chayiv b'chayra. Behema that belongs to shutvim is chayiv in b'chayra. Rabbi Eloi pait. Rabbi Eloi says is taka pater. My time in Rabbi Eloi. The ksiv bekarcha v'tzayncha. Your bakar and your tzayn is chayiv in bichar, and not if it belongs to shutvim. We asked even earlier, b'haksiv bekarcha v'tzayncha. It says lashon plural. Sounds like even Shal Shutfim, which was what Rabbi's Mekar was, that Rabbi Lai agrees that there is Shutfis. No, Amai is Deiche, and he says the Brisa says, Bekarchem B'tzaimchem Dikulu Yisrael. The plural Bakr B'tzaim is not referring to a Bakr that belongs to many people, but rather many peoples. All of their B'chayros individually is Chayiv. And so from the fact that we see Abai has a Brisa that Rabbi Lai argues, and he says by B'chayros, and he's is no shutfis, and he is deicha the raya from Bekarchem. He's deicha the raya of all the other ones as well. Amr Chanina Misura, he says, listen to Lahali Kali, that Rebbe Lai does not agree to these klalim from a different place, because it says the Tanya behema shutim chayv matanos, behema of shutim is chayv matanos. Rebbe Lai says beferish is pater. My time yalif nesina merish is that there is malahalon the shutfis loy afkan the shutfis loy the isak edaitach that we asked that above but truma. You want to say truma can make nesina that there is a chi of shutfis nelif nesina truma. Why don't you say there is shutfis from truma? Alamai ala shemami nazak the gemara by truma also nami paiter. And so, therefore, we see from this verse clearly Rabbi Lazar does not hold there is shutfis by truma. Ima truma be'aretz in. So now we're going to ask a bunch of questions. If you're learning out everything from truma, then it should be exactly like truma in many other ways. Like how so? Ima truma be'aretz in. There's only truma in Eretz Yisrael. Mechutz aretz alai. Af matanes be'aretz in mechutz aretz alai. Are you going to say that there's only matnas kuhuna in Eretz Yisrael and not in Chutz La'aretz? Rabbi Yossi min Harabil in. Yes, it's true, and I even have a brisa that says that. The Hatanya in a raya benichusa Rabbi Lai Aimer matanes einoigin ella be'aretz v'chein haya Rabbi Lai Aimer reish sagez einoig ella be'aretz. My time in Rabbi Lai. Why also reish sagez? He says it's only to get noig in Eretz Yisrael. My time with Rabbi Lai, Amarava, Yalif Nasina Sinami Truma, Matruma Be'aretz in, Befutz Aretz Lai, after Ishis Agaze Be'aretz in, Befutz Aretz Lai. Amarle Abaya, Ima Truma Tevelis, after Ishis Agaze Tevelis. So you're telling me I learned out Ishis Agaze from Truma, and to Taka say that it's only Chayiv in Eretz Yisrael and not in Chutz Aretz. So you're going to say the same thing in regards to that it's Tevelis before you take off Truma from your grain, it's asur to eat because it's tevel. It's like mixed up. And you're going to see the same thing by Reishis Hagez. If before you give the Reishis Hagez of your sheet has a din of tevel, you've never really heard of such a thing before. Zakti Gemara, Amarle, Amarkrav, Reishis Gaze, Saincha Titin Lai. You have to give the Reishis Hagez from your sheep in the Chabai Alameri Shisai. It only has a din of Reishis Hagez after you shore it from your sheep. That means before you share it from your sheep, it doesn't have a din of Reishis case that it can be considered tevel. So the Gemara is going to ask another question. Okay, but ima truma chayav and Allah misa v'chaymesh. If somebody comes to eats truma, he has to pay back a chaymesh, and if he eats it b'meisa, he's chay misa. Are you going to tell him the same thing with Reishis Hagez? Reishis Hagez chayav lav misa v'chaymesh. Also very strange. We don't find any misa or chaymish in regards to Reishis Hagez, but you're learning out from Truma, should have the same dinim. Amarkra, no, because there you have a miyot in the pasuk. Umesu bay v'yasaf alav. The pasuk by Truma says you can die from it, and you would have to add to it. Alav v'lay Reishis Hagez. It's a miyot dafka by Truma. Are you having to add if you got rid of it b'shaygig, and by only umeisuba you die for it truma v'lei Reishis Hagez. Okay, but the next question is ima truma rishain v'sheni acharaha af Reishis Hagez risham shein acharaha. Truma has ma'aser rishain and ma'aser sheni after truma. So same with that truma. There's two things that happen after it. Are you going to say by Reishis Hagez you do the main Reishis Hagez and maybe then a secondary and a third one? Also, we don't find such a thing. Makra, there also I have a miyot Reishis. Ein loicha boy al reishis. By reishis, it calls it ein loicha boy al reishis b'vav. It calls it Reishis Hagez because it is the first thing and it's the only thing. Ma truma. Oh, I could still ask ma truma mechadash al hayashan loy. After Reishis Hagez mechadash al hayashan loy. You're going to tell me the same way truma. You can't take off new truma and old truma. There's the year dividing them, and the old truma, and you can't mix them up. Are you going to say the same thing with Reishis Hagez, that you're going to have different years of Reishis Hagez and you can't take off one from the other? And that thing where it says, yes, the Hatanya, and I'll bring you a raya. Hayulai shtei rechelos. It says if he has two rachels, two sheeps, gazaz, he shears them. V'haniach, he puts it on the side, and then the next season he has gazaz. V'haniach, he shears them and puts it again, puts it aside again, and he gathers it up. Shnayim u'shloishim shanim, 2 and 3 years altogether. Ein mitzdarfos. That is not mitzdarf to shear reish sakes, which we said in the beginning of the parak has to be 5 sheeps. You can't take 2 sheeps and gather over the years until you have 5 sheep's worth. It doesn't work like that. However, the Gemara is medayik. It's only because you had 2 chamesh mitzdarfos. But if I had 5 sheeps and I shore them and I put that aside and then I wait the next season until I get the right amount, because the Mishnah had said you need to start with 5 sheep, and then there's a certain amount you have to get from it. It sounds like that would be mitzdarif, but if I compare it to truma, it shouldn't be mitzdarif. And that the Gemara says, "El shemamina." What I skipped line. A mitzdarifis. Ha chamesh mitzdarif. But sounds like 5 would be mitzdarif. But then I have another brisa v'hatanya that ein mitzdarifis even the 5. So what's going on? At one brisa it says 2 is not mitzdarif over the years, but it sounds like 5 would be. But then I have another brisa that says clearly even 5 is not mitzdarif. And the Gemara says, Elish mamina, it must be had rebelai, the had rabbanan. One is shitas rebelai and one is shitas rabbanan. That means that rebelai is the one who holds that it is not mitzdarif, because I learn out just like truma, and you can't mix up the years. And the brisa that sounds like it could be mitzdarif is the Rabbanan, and that means like the Rabbanan do not learn out from Truma. So this is another raya that Rabbi Loi learns out everything from Truma, and yes, you cannot take off from one year from the other, from the fact that I have a brisa that says even 5 is not mitzdarif 1 year to the next. And the Gemara is going to ask another question. Ima Truma Gadol B'chiyuv Chayiv Gadol B'Ptur Pater, Truma that grew B'chiyuv, that means regular Yid owns the field, it grows Truma is Chayiv, but if it grew by a guy, it's growing B'Ptur, you're not Chayiv even if the Yid buys the field after that. So that's a din by Truma. Are you going to tell me the same thing by Reish Sagez if I buy a sheep from a guy, which a guy is not Chayiv in Reish Sagez, so it's also B'Ptur? Are you going to tell me Af Reish Sagez Nami Gadol B'Chiyuv Chayiv B'Ptur Pater? The Gemara first says, how do you know by Truma that there's such a thing? V'gabi Truma minalam. The Tanya Yisrael shalakaf sada b'Surya. Surya is a place where a guy does have a kinyan in it. It's not exactly Eretz Yisrael. So if a Yid bought a field in Surya, may kechavim from a guy, ad shalai via shlish, which is considered already grown a third of the way. So before shlish, now he's chayiv, because it's like it's grew, when the Yid bought it, before it grew a shlish, it's like it completely grew in the Yid's rishah, so he's chayiv in Truma. But Mishaheviu shlish, if he bought it after a shlish, so Rebbe Kiva says, mechayiv b'teisafis, whatever grew after a third, you're still chayiv on. The Chachamim say you are pater, because the ikar growth is the first third, that was grown by a guy, b'makim p'tor, so the Chachamim say you're pater. V'chi tema hachanami. So that's how we see that by Truma, that Hagadol B'Chiyav is Chayiv and Hagadol B'Ptur is Pater, and that's the Kuliyama. Rabbi Kiva only says if it continued growing after a third, the new stuff is Chayiv, but everyone agrees the stuff that grew. B'Ptur, while it was a guy, is Pater. So V'chi Tema, we will say the same thing by Reish Sakez, that if it grew B'Ptur, you would be Pater. V'hatnan, but I have a Mishnah that says Halikeach Geiz Tzayin, if you buy the shearings of the wool from a guy, you're Pater. Because pater Reish Sagez, because the Torah says you're only chayiv on the sheep that you shore, not wool that you buy. However, hatzaynai ligza is chayiv. If you bought his sheep ready to be shorn, it says you're chayiv Reish Sagez. But it grew b'ptur. Why would you be chayiv? Learn out from Truma that you're not. And that the Gemara says not a question, because Mas Nisan, that Mishnah, the like Rebbe Lai, is not like Rebbe Lai, and we're only saying Rebbe Lai says I would learn out from Truma. And then we're going to ask another question. Ima truma mimin al she'ina minoi. Truma, you can't take off one truma from one min on for another min. Loi. Af Reish Sagez mimin al she'ina minoi. Loi. You're going to tell me by Reish Sagez also not. And maybe, as if I learn out from truma, it should be that way. V'gabe truma minoi. How do you know by truma you can't take off on min she'ina minoi? The Tanya, because I have a price that says, how you like she'ina minim? Te'enim shechayra yisulavan. It says 2 types of two minen of dates, black and white ones. Vechein, hold on, everyone knows a te'ina is a fig, a tamar is a date. Because how do you remember? Because you go on a date with tamar. Okay, so te'ina are figs, black figs and white figs. Vechein shnei minei chitim, two minim of chitim, ein tarmin u'maiser mizeh hozeh. You can't take up trumas maises from one on the other. Rabbi Yitzchak Eimer Mishum Rabbi Lai. Rabbi Yitzchak said in the name of Rabbi Lai that Beis Shammai Eimerim ein taimrin u'Beis Hillel Eimerim tarmin. So we see by truma you can't take off b'mishein aminoi. Af reishis hageiz memin al she'ein aminoi light. It should be that way. Learn out reishis hageiz from truma. You also can't take off amin al she'ein aminoi. Is that so? Sakti Gemara in yes. V'hatnan, I have a Mishnah that says, Hayolai, Beis Minim, if you have two types of reishis hageiz, shechufais ulevanais. Shechufais are either dirty or dark, and levanais are white ones. Machar lai shechufais. By the way, it's our Mishnah in the beginning of this parak. I'm like looking at it like where have we ever heard of this before? Where in the beginning of the parak it says in our Mishnah, Machar lai shechufais avalei levanais. If he sold him only his shechufais sheep, but not the levanais, zenoisim atzmai. The lekeach has to give reishis hageiz on what he bought. Vizet noisim atzmai. The meicher has to give him whatever he has left, which means they are considered two separate minim, and you cannot be taking off one on the other, which is exactly like we just said by truma. Because if it was that by reishis hageiz you could take off one min on another min, I wouldn't see the shechufais and levanais as two separate things. And the meicher himself, who is the one who grew all the sheep and has the chiyuv, he should just take off once, and the likach shouldn't have to do anything. From the fact that we split into two separate minim and that each are taking off, that means it's like truma, you can't take off from one on the other. And that the Gemara says, okay, that's a good raya, but according to that, elame'ata, the seifa that says in our Mishnah, diktani zicharim abalein nekevais zenes la'atmai zenes la'atmai. If he sold him only the zachars but not nekevas, they each still take off on their own. The meicher and the lekeach hachanami mishum detrei minu ninu. Can you say that the reason is because it's two minim? The zachar and nekeva sheep are not considered a separate min. So why are they taking off separately? Right now we might not know, but it can't be a raya that it's a separate min. But the same logic you're saying in the Reisha, you're using to prove that it is a separate min. Rather, we'll be daicha the whole raya. What's pshat the seifa zela atzma zela atzma? Yizak the Gemara. Ela eitza taiva kamash malan. The Mishnah is not saying because it's a separate min. It's actually just telling you an eitza taiva for the meicher. The lace of lei mehai derachich umehai de'ashin. That he should buy back a portion of the shearings that he sold, which are inferior, and give those as reishis hageiz, and then he'll gain by not having to give the best quality stuff. When you speak that out, it sounds kind of bad, like Kain and Hevel situation. I'm just reading the Gemara, I can't help you with that. Hachanami eitza teva kamash malan. So too, by the shkufais and the levanais, it's only telling you an eitza for the meicher, the lace of lehu meitervayu, in order to give reishis hageiz from that sect. Al kapanim, the Gemara is saying it's not a raya that they're both separate minim and that you cannot take off one from the other. Really, you could, but if you could take off from one on the other, it's not like truma. And you're saying I'm learning out reishis hageiz from truma. It should be a problem on Rebbe Lai, and that the Gemara answers. We already said how ukim no masnis into like Rebbe Lai. We already established our Mishnah is not like Rebbe Lai on the top of the Amud. But the Gemara still asks another question, Ima Truma, Be'in and Reishis, Sheshira Nekarim. When you take off Truma, you're separating it, and what I separated, now there's something it's separated from. It's nicker, my separation. Ima Truma, Be'in and Reishis, Sheshira Nekarim, you can recognize what's left over. Af Reishis Hageiz, Sheshira Nekarim. It should also be that you have Reishis Hageiz, there's something left over. Meaning you can't say, I want my whole field to be Truma. It has to be nicker, what you're moving it from, and you have something left over. The same thing should apply by reishis hageiz. And the Gemara says, that is also true. The Hatna, because I have a Mishnah that says, Ha'aymer kol garni truma. Somebody says, my whole silo, I want it to be truma. The chol isasi chala. I played a whole batch of chala. I want the whole batch, the whole batch of chala to be chala, and I have nothing left. Lo amar klum. It doesn't work. Ha kol gizai rashis divar of kaimim. But it sounds like, but the Brisa says, if he says all of my shearings should be rashis hagez, it would work. But I have another Brisa, the Tanya idach loy amar klum. Ella lav shmamina ha Rebbe Rabbanan. One is Rebbe Eli, who learns out from Truma that you can't give away the whole thing, and that's the Brisa that says loy amar klum. And the Rabbanan, who aren't going to rely, are saying dafka truma, you can't give the whole thing, but rashis hagez, you could give the whole thing. And that is the end of the questions on Rebbe Eli about learning truma from rashis hagez. And the Gemara now says like this: Amar Nachman bar Yitzchak ha'idna. Nowadays, naig kule nagu alma kahani tlasi sav. We go after these three great old men. Rebbe Eli rashis hagez. This shita the Tanya Rebbe Eli Omer rashis hagez eina naig el ba'aretz. It's only naig in Eretz Yisrael. Rebbe Yehuda ben Beseira also like it's like we're paskening like Rebbe Yehuda ben Beseira by divrei Torah, but divrei Torah the Tanya Rebbe Yehuda ben Beseira Omer ein divrei Torah mekabel tuma means if somebody is a Baal Keri or Tameh in another fashion, he is able to learn Torah, and he doesn't have to go to the mikvah first. Ukrab Yeshia, we also pass like Rabbi Yeshia B'Klayim the Tanya Rabbi Yeshia Aimer Lo Eilam Ein Chayiv Adam Ein Chayiv Ad Sheyisach Chitos Sayar V'Kartam V'Peilos Yad Kudat. Rabbi Yeshia holds in Klayim, in order to be over on the Deraisa Tika Klayim, you have to plant at one time in one toss of the hand a chita, a wheat, and a barley, and a chartzan, which is a vine, a grape seed. So those are the three things we pass on. That is that Gemara. Look at Dr. Gemara weiter. Our Mishnah had quoted Chaymer Bizraya V'Lechayim Ve'Akeva. There's a Chumrah of Matnas Kahuna over rashis hagez. And what is that? There's a few different things. There's support, and the Gemara is going to deal with the ones that we're dealing with. The listening Chaymer Bereshis Hagez Shnoig B'Treifas. Why doesn't the Mishnah also say that Reshis Hagez is noig even by a treifa animal, Masha Ein Kim B'Matanes, as opposed to Matnas Kuna is not noig by a treifa? Why is that not in the Mishnah? Ravina, Amani Reb Shimon here. This is like Rashitas Reb Shimon. The Tanya Reb Shimon Paitros a treifas Reshis Hagez. He Taka says a treifa is patam Reshis Hagez. My time with Reb Shimon. Why does Reb Shimon hold that? Yalif Nesina Matanes. He learns out Reshis Hagez from Matanes. Again, that drasha. Ma Matanes treifa light. Half Reshis Hagez nami treifa light. V'i Yalif Nesina Matanes. Once you're coming into that drasha Nesina, what's the Gemara going to ask? Yalif Nesina Me Truma. Ma Truma be'eretz in b'chutz la'aretz lai. Half Reshis Hagez nami be'eretz in b'chutz la'aretz lai. Alama Tnan Reshis Hagez noig be'eretz u b'chutz la'aretz. And that question originally we said Rabbi Eli doesn't hold to that, but right now we're going in Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon argues on Rabbi Eli, so according to him, we should say that it's only noig be'eretz and b'chutz aretz, and Rabbi Shimon does not hold that. Ella, the reason is not because of the Nesina. Ella, hand time of Rabbi Shimon, you'll have sign me meiser, ma meiser treifa lai, half rashis hagez treifa lai. The Hasam Minalan, how do you know meiser is not applicable by a treifa? The Ksiv, Kalasher Yavar Tachas HaShevet, he has to be able to pass underneath the stick, the marking plate, the treifa, she'ino everes, and Rashi brings down why since one can't a treifa walk. Well, if he's missing a leg, he can't walk. And the same way that treifa of someone who's missing his leg, minhar kuval maila, can't go tachas hasheves, he is excluded from meiser. All treifas as well are excluded from meiser. Frakti Gemara v'leilif tzayin tzayin bechar make a gzera shava to bechar. Ma bechar afilu treifa is kedushas bechara, even if it's a treifa. Af reshis hagez afilu treifa. And that the Gemara says mistabra. It's more mistabra to learn tzayin tzayin mi meiser than bechara. Why? Mi meiser have leilamelef shekein zacharim tameim bimerubim. These are a list of their similarities. Meirechem adam pashut lifnei hadibor. These things are learn out from meiser, which both of them are noig by zacharim and not nekeves. Tameim. Rashi says, what's the svara of tameim? Is meiser reshis hagez are not noig by tameim, but bechar is. Bimerubim, it means there's a certain of shear. Meiser is a tenth, and reshis hagez is by 5, and you don't have any sort of shear by bechar. Mei rechem is that they're both kaddish mei rechem. They're not. I'm sorry. They are not kaddish merachem. Bechar is kaddish merachem. Meiser and Meseches gaze has nothing to do with kedusha. Adam is that. It's also you have bechar by Adam. Pashut is they are only named by. You know what? I just said something silly. It's Adam Pashut. And lifnei hadibur is it was named before before Hamat Torah. Adrab effecti Gemara, learn out. It's better to learn out Rishis gaze from Bechar. Why? Adrab bin Bechar havlei melech shekain yasain. They're both named by a behemoth that doesn't have a mother, as opposed to a meiser does not, because it says it's got to be tachas imay. So a bechar, an animal that was noiled without a mother, the mother died during childbirth, it is not noig meiser. Shavlachu, that was bought b'shutfis, in partnership, and also nasnu b'fnei it's its name b'fnei habayis, kain b'kedusha u'mechira. It also has to do with mechira, v'hanach nevishan. This list is much greater. What is bechira? Bechira means also we said bechira is kaddish merachem. Meiser is not, and gaze is also not. You don't need to be makdish because it has nothing to do with kedusha. Al kapanim, we can go through this list slower with Rashi at a different time. We're not going to do that now. While so it's more of a svara al kapanim takti gemara. It's more of a svara to learn Meseches gaze from bechar than meiser, and that the Gemara answers. Pashut mean pashut adachle. It's better to learn Meseches gaze from something which is named by a pashut, which is meiser, and not learn out bechar, which is only named by a kedushas bechar. Thank you so much for joining me today. We will, as Hashem, be back tomorrow.